Do the microphones work now?
Yep, sounds like it.
So, I see a head come up, so I guess so. Sorry for the delay. We tried going the technology route for our first presentation, but we're missing a few people anyway. We're missing Marta today. Wound up with a cold on Friday, and she couldn't make it, so we're short-staffed today as well. So, are we ready, Mr. Vice Chair?
Okay. All right, we'll call this meeting to order at 1:43. We'll convene as the RTPA, and we'll recess as RTPA and reconvene as Policy Advisory Committee. Is there any public expression at this time?
I need to call the roll first, excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Director Scalmanini?
Here.
Director Stransky? Yes. Director Chimolino?
Here.
Here. Director Wasserman?
Here.
Director Ranachak? No, we have our alternate, Mr. Carter.
Here.
Thank you. And Director Krosky?
Here.
And Chair Judy is not here at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any public expression at this time?
Oh, and I'm sorry, I should have called Director Rex Jackman from Caltrans is on the Policy Advisory Committee.
Here.
And thank you very much. Go, carry on.
Okay. Any public expression at this time? Seeing that there is none, we'll move to number 5. Presentation and discussion, Garcia River Climate Adaptation Feasibility Study, Caltrans.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll just introduce this real quick. You have a staff report, kind of explains what's been going on for actually the past several years, and it's time to bring it to this board for review. There's been a lot of staff work put in on it the last 3 or 4 years. You see in my staff report that it says the comment period ended prior to today, and I think that Rex told me when we were in Point Arena the other day that it's been extended to the end of this week. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that will give the board opportunity to comment should you want to say anything in addition to what I have, or say, well, don't listen to him, listen to us, or whatever you want to do. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Jackman.
As you may have noticed, as folks were coming in, we were doing our best to get the projector to work. I have a presentation that I put together and delivered last week at the Point Arena City Council meeting, which is the presentation. We couldn't get it to work on the projector, so fortunately Mr. Dow put some of the key graphics into the packet, some of the pages and some of the key pages from the study, and so I will sort of in combination, you know, I think I'm just gonna wing it basically, but we're at a point now where we worked for the last couple of years doing an engineered feasibility study which looked at the Garcia River floodplain, and the study came about largely as a result of many years of outcry or difficulties from members of the public, including both residents in the area and tribal members from the Manchester Point Arena Band of Pomo Indians. And several years ago, we decided to take a closer look. There was a lot of frustration related to the gates that we had put up at some point somewhere around 20 years ago. We installed the gates. We're a little fuzzy on some of the history, and in terms of the details of when those gates were installed, but they were installed and they are closed when the area is flooded. And so people want a solution, understandably, when the gates are closed or when the area is flooded and impassable. It makes for considerable inconvenience for the local folks in order to get around from the south to the north or the north to the south. There's considerable out-of-direction travel involved. I think, Phil, you might refresh my memory. You did a calculation at one point looking at how long it, or how many miles it is around from on the local roads when the highway is closed. Do you recall that?
Yeah, it's somewhere 219 miles and about 5 hours of travel. That's via an all-weather state highway. But, you know, that's not going to do, of course, local people know what some of the county road cutoffs are and all that. But as far as dependable travel for regular state highway traffic, that's what it takes, over 5 hours.
So those are the on paved roads making that trip. So that illustrates, you know, that there's considerable impact to the folks out there when the highway is impassable. And anecdotally, in recent years, well, it appears that is not going to get any better in terms of the frequency and length of closures, due to a few things. One of them is that they have stopped mining the gravel from the riverbed, which, in addition to accumulating more gravel and creating less capacity in the riverbed for the water, for the channel, it also facilitates growth of vegetation in there, which slows down the flow of the water. And so our attention has been drawn to this, and we, in the last few years, have taken several interim measures. We've installed some cameras which allow, and it's unfortunate that I couldn't get the presentation to work because we added some additional slides just on the subject of the web portal that we have. But if you research Garcia River Caltrans web portal, there's a page there that has useful links, including the live cameras that can show people whether or not the highway is flooded. And basically, I guess, before I continue, as Mr. Dow mentioned, we've published a draft of our feasibility study, which is currently open for review and comment. And we're soliciting comments right now, and the comment period has been extended through April 6th. So I encourage folks to get on that web portal, and there you can access, in addition to seeing the cameras and some of the forecasting tools that we have that allow people to view when the river is projected to be flooded. You can also review the actual study and some of the other useful links.
We've got that link in the packet right on the staff report there.
Great, thank you. So basing things, I'm trying to, the presentation is going to be altered significantly by using the hard copies, but feel free to interrupt me with questions, or we can have questions at the end. But for now, I'm going to go fairly from the hip. As I mentioned, there's been interest for many years in solving the issue of the flooding, and basically what happens when the river floods, the river bursts the banks. There's a number of different things that occur, but a very simplified explanation is the water flows across the floodplain and fills in the Gasker Slough area, which is the lowest point. And you'll see, if you review the study, you'll see we have LiDAR imagery that is very effective in showing how the Gasker Slough is basically at sea level. So when it floods and when it fills up with water, it takes a very long time for that water to dissipate and for it to drain out. So that really becomes a focal point for us in the study to, if we can address just the Gasker Slough, that would greatly reduce the amount of time that the highway would be closed, because, as I said, when that area becomes flooded, it fills up with water, and then because it's so low and there's so much vegetation in that area also, it doesn't dry up for a long period of time. Even though most of the highway the water may have been there very briefly, there's the one little section where we have the cameras pointed that remains flooded for a longer period of time. Another aspect of this, as I mentioned, the Manchester Point Arena tribe of Pomo Indians. If you look at the first page of the packet materials, you can see Windy Hollow Road, which runs roughly parallel to Highway 1 to the east, and historically there was a seasonal crossing upriver from the existing Garcia River Bridge where tribal members and others could cross, especially if the lower bridge or the area of the lower highway were to be closed. That seasonal bridge hasn't been installed for many years, but there has remained an interest on the part of the tribe in rebuilding the bridge in some way. And most recently, in about 2005, Caltrans funded an environmental justice grant that was a study looking at replacing Windy Hollow Bridge that the tribe did in conjunction with, I believe it was some consulting firms and BIA. And they looked at a range of alternatives, and we found some documentation fairly recently that we discovered it, that appeared to indicate that at one point there was a project funded to move forward in 2010, and we're still in the process of researching if that funding still exists, if the project is still alive, or what the status of that is. That will be some of the research that we'll be conducting as we wrap up this study, and hopefully we'll have answers, more information about that possibility. Any of the alternatives that we looked at, all of them are quite expensive, but part of the purpose of a feasibility study is to get some preliminary cost information to help make decisions as we move forward. And I emphasized at the previous presentation that really the cost information that we've developed isn't really anything to take to the bank, but what it does provide is a relative comparison for these different alternatives, so that you can see which components of each of the alternatives would cost more or which would cost less. So you can see on the map where the gap is in Windy Hollow Road, and Gasker Slough is labeled on there, although the writing is very small, and the Garcia River Overflow Bridge, which is a very small bridge also just to the north of that. I will mention that we do have a project that has been initiated that's in the works to replace the existing Garcia River Bridge and the Garcia River Overflow Bridge. Those bridges are slated to be replaced as part of our regular SHOP, State Highway Operations and Protection Program, which includes replacement of bridges as they become obsolete. And so that's been in the works for some time. But that really won't solve the longer term issue of the flooding. And so while it is necessary to replace that bridge or those two bridges, it won't completely address the issues that are out there. So I'll go through and just summarize the alternatives that we looked at, and again explain that right now we're at this publication of the draft study. We're soliciting input from the public and from other agencies. We've started to compile the comments that we've received. We're going to address all of the comments that we've received in one way or another, and that may be through edits to the actual study, or it may be through a written response that will be provided to the comments that have been received. So the first alternative is to basically raise the grade of the highway through the area that floods. It would include a viaduct or something along the lines of an elevated structure or a trestle of some kind that would allow the water to flow underneath it, so that during the times when it floods now, that water would flow freely underneath the highway facility and drain out as it normally does. This first alternative, it comes out to be among the most expensive, although most of the alternatives that we looked at are in the same price range. And as far as you can see the cost breakdown, I think, on one of the later pages, but it's largely due to the amount of structures that are involved in that alternative. The viaduct is, I think it's over 600 or 1,800 feet long, which contributes, significantly to how much it would cost, even though it doesn't involve building new road segments like most of the other alternatives do. It does have several bridges and that extensive elevated structure. And a lot of these alternatives include basically alignments that are off of the existing state highway. We looked at those because we were looking at a range of possible alternatives, and the question comes up, what if we built an alternative that was a new segment that was off of the state highway system? Who would own it? Who would maintain it? What would it look like? We looked at basically, we worked under the assumptions that the facility that would be built would meet state highway standards. We didn't answer a lot of those questions in this study. This study is a starting point that allows us to, again, to have a comparative view of these different alternatives. And so alternative 2 follows the old alignment or the existing alignment of Windy Hollow Road and includes a new bridge at the location where the old bridge on Windy Hollow had existed. It would be a considerably large bridge, and again, because of its size, and it would be fairly high up, going down to the other side, the north end of Windy Hollow, would be fairly costly. $11 million in the structures cost alone, and then the roadway improvements to get the roadway up to as close to meeting standards as possible would be $34 million. So the total for the alternative 1 with all the elevated structure, the total cost we have estimated for that was $62 million. And the total cost for alternative 2 was $56 million. Going on to alternative 3, that alternative includes a section of new roadway that avoids some of the steeper grades, gets it closer to meeting standards in terms of how steep the roadway would be, but it's very similar to Alternative 2 in that it's a whole separate segment that goes to the east of the existing Route 1. Alternative 3, that was Alternative 3, I'm sorry. And Alternative 4 goes roughly along the grade of the terrain that's down below, along the edge of Gasker Slough, over to the same location for a Windy Hollow Bridge connection. The value of the Windy Hollow Bridge and why it's included in 3 out of these 4 alternatives is several-fold. One, it provides a local connection for local residents and for tribal members. The tribe has communities that are on both the north and the south side of Garcia River, and so they, for many years, have had to utilize the state highway to connect from the north to the south. And this would provide a much shorter travel time for them. And during times of highway closure, of flooding, it would provide an alternate route that people could use. Again, whether the question has come up, well, would this be a new segment of Highway 1? And I think that while for the purposes of the study, we worked under the assumption that it would be built to state highway standards. Whether or not, if something were built, whether it would be owned by the county or the county and the city or the state, we didn't really answer that question. And of course that's a big question that would need to be answered. So I think there are also a couple of other alternatives that have come up that are, one is in the study and one is we're looking at that's sort of a hybrid of some of the components of these different projects. The hybrid, or the one that we find to be probably the most feasible, involves addressing Gasker Slough. Of course, we still have the project that's already in the works to replace the existing Garcia River Bridge and the overflow bridge, but we would also address Gasker Slough, and that, as I said before, would greatly reduce the amount of time that the highway is closed. So the duration of closure would greatly reduce the impacts to everyone. And a longer term, we would be very supportive and continue to look for ways to help fund and to participate in the funding and construction of a Windy Hollow Bridge. But we do recognize that that would be a longer term and more challenging component to pursue. Not sure if, again, not having the slide show, that I may have overlooked components, but I think I've touched on basically the main points, and I think I'll reiterate again that we're encouraging people to go ahead and read the draft study and to submit comments, and we're compiling all of those comments, and we'll address the comments in some form at the time that we finalize the study, once our final analysis is completed.
Okay, I have a couple questions, but first, any council members want to address questions to these guys?
I do have some questions, but
I do have questions, but I was just letting you guys go first. Nothing over there?
Actually, I have questions.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
And we're on. Everybody can hear me okay? Scott Ignacio, Councilmember Point Arena. Thank you, Caltrans, for coming last week and extending that comment period. We were in recess in February. Richie and I were pleased to have you there with John Nichols, and it was very informative. One of the questions that Caltrans had been asking is if they could get tribal input, and I wanted to make sure the council's aware that the Manchester Point Arena tribal chairman's in the room right back here. So perhaps we would have an opportunity to hear from the tribe in this comment period. One of the things that the city was asking, and I thought it'd be important that this council be aware of, in the alternatives with the public comments that we had and the city council member comments, with alternative 4, looking at some of the price lists here on your page 21 in your packet, it breaks it down, and as Rex has explained, there is a separate project to refurb or replace Garcia River Bridge and the overflow bridge. One of the complications with that, and Rex was able to give me a number, not exact, but estimated to be in 12 million. Is that correct, Rex?
For the existing bridge project, yeah, that's the
to launch in
preliminary
2025.
estimate.
So with elevating a viaduct for 1,800 feet, that would basically make the overflow bridge too low, was one thing we were realizing we didn't talk about. So that would be a complete replacement on top of that. These numbers for alternate 1, which talk about the viaduct at 62.6 million, do not even include the 12 million of the current project that would be impacted. And basically you'd be throwing that south bridge out because it would still be too low for the viaduct. The viaduct only comes up, as the report suggests, enough to, well, adequate enough to have farm equipment traverse underneath it, which would be valuable to the local farmers out there. But a bridge up on the Windy Hollow, as Rex has explained, would be significantly higher. We don't have an exact number, but when you look at the diagrams, and his presentation was great on the LiDAR, which was the radar showing the elevations. There's a natural landmass and a closing there, and it's been used historically as a bridge crossing. So the river's already been impacted in that area. And if the bridge is up as high as they're talking about, it would have much less impact than a 1,800-foot viaduct would across the flats. Caltrans and this council, I believe, are interested in not jeopardizing public safety. Coming off of a 15-year career with Coast Life Support, I've been in those dark and stormy nights where we could not get a helicopter, and we had to call through dispatch and find out from Caltrans, 1, is the river open going north? The river was open going north. 2, could we get back before the river would possibly close? And more than 3 occasions in 15 years, I was caught in that storm on the other side. What do you do when there's no medical coverage south of the Garcia River? You're depending on Guerneville as the next closest unit. And as we know, that's quite a bit of distance away. A bridge connecting at Windy Hollow would have longevity. Right now, when the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office has to respond, they have to respond an additional, they're coming typically from Fort Bragg, they have to respond an additional 6.1 miles to address the citizens on Windy Hollow. And that translates to more than 15% of their travel just to get to a domestic call down there. And that takes 10, 12 minutes. They're screaming through town, you know. If we had a bridge there, it'd be a direct connection, not only for law enforcement, for fire, and for EMS. I can't stress the importance it is, and no pun intended, to bridge these communities between Manchester and Point Arena, between Point Arena City and Manchester as a village. Having alternate routes, we talked a little bit earlier about if there's a closure south of Point Arena, we've got ridge roads. We've got, other roads where traffic could be detoured. North of Point Arena, between there and the Garcia River Bridge, which is about 2.2 miles, there is nothing. It stops, and it goes back to what we talked about, a 5 to 5.5 hour route around. Now think about that. From Irish Beach and Manchester, you have students attending school. That road closure doesn't close on a schedule. It closes when it's necessary. And so if it's during the day, during school, those families are separated from their children. The school buses can't, there's no special flotilla to put the kids back across. So that causes a problem. So I would encourage this council to support alternative 4. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask my questions real quick, and then I'm going to open it up to the public if they want to make a comment. Looking at all these alternatives, and I see this Windy Hollow Road, what's the viability of the geotech under all these proposals? I mean, when you go in there and you start digging new road, pioneering new road, it's only as good as the ground you're working on. Is that existing road for alternate number 2, is that a good road base there?
Well, the study didn't really include a geotech analysis, so there are a lot of unknowns still.
Okay.
So I think the alternative 2 follows the existing road, the existing and historic road path. It is fairly steep. I don't believe it. I think it would be too steep, or parts of it would probably be problematic in terms of building them to meet a safe state highway standard. And that's part of the reason that we developed the other alternative 3, and we're looking at some of the other possible alignments. But to cut to the chase, we don't have as nearly as much information as we would eventually need to actually choose a project.
Because like on 3 and 4, we're looking at, you're going to pioneer all new road and tear up virgin ground. And so it would be really nice to know if you could build road on that, because as well as I do that when you start digging into an incline of a hill, it has to be stable. Well, my next question, he kind of answered it, but what feedback has Caltrans gotten from the tribe or from locals in Point Arena? Has there been anybody call or anybody start lobbying you guys on this yet?
We've received considerable comments, quite a substantial comment letter from the city of Point Arena, and also received comments from the county, as well as from MCOG. And not a great deal of comments from individual members of the public yet. And I did place a couple calls to the tribe, but we haven't had a chance to connect. But we anticipate that we would like to meet with the tribe and solicit input from them as well. Hopefully before the comment period closes, but even whenever we manage to do that, we'll incorporate the concerns of the tribe into the final study.
And then my last question is, have you reached out to potential property owners that would be affected if they had to give up land or anything to build a new system?
We had a discussion with I forget the name of the person who was a historic owner of the Stornetta property, the mother there, but it was very, very high level conversation, and as far, I believe that most of their actual ownership has been turned over to the BLM, and BLM is one of the agencies that's already submitted written comments to us.
Okay. All right. Well, I think right now we can take.
Excuse me, Mr. Vice Chairman. May I just make an additional comment? to Scott's presentation. And by the way, Scott introduced himself as a council member. He is also our mayor of Point Arena. As to the so-called fifth alternative, or the partial alternative, Rex mentioned in passing, that is the rebuilding and raising up of the Gasker Slough Bridge. The comment I would have would be that if the overall project, one of the alternatives, any of those alternatives are all in the $60 million range at this point, if they seemed, because of funding problems or other environmental difficulties, that raising of the Gasker Bridge might be considered as an interim measure, I would suggest perhaps a link from that point over to near where the Rancheria, the Point Arena Rancheria is at this point, someplace near the casino. And then with the possibility of later, when more funding is available, adding the bridge at that point. That would give an access to the north for the Point Arena Rancheria and for emergency vehicles in the case of, in that case. So that would be a suggestion also I'd like to make in addition.
Yeah, and Director Wasserman did provide or meet with us and explain that concept to us, which we found to be quite intriguing, and we will be taking a closer look at it as a possibility, or as possibly that utilizing components of it in terms of elements that we might end up pursuing.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
So I have a few questions about this also, and if you don't mind me starting with something not particularly high on the priority list for our transportation stuff, but where exactly is the casino? I'm looking at the big map. Is it?
The casino is
where it is.
located at the north end of the south leg of the Windy Hollow Road.
Where the bridge would go, the south end of where the bridge would go.
Very close.
Very close
Yeah.
there. Okay, thank you. And I did notice when I read through this that there were no first-hand comments from the tribes there, and so I'm glad there's someone here from them. And although I still haven't heard firsthand, so I would like to sometime today. One of the big long-term questions I have about this is which alternative best prepares the area for further rise in sea levels. And that wasn't in the table, and I don't know if it was really thought about, but that's on my mind as to, well, which one are we going to be glad that we built 30 to 50 years from now?
Any and all of them, if they were developed as a project, would incorporate sea level rise and would address sea level rise for, you know, they would follow the guidance, which looks at, you know, I think if it's for a structure, it's going to be at least 100-year forecast that we would be applying. And so I would say, you know, any of them, all of them would address sea level rise.
Mm-hmm. Well, plenty of it, I hope. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add that this was a subject of a climate change study with a grant that Caltrans got through Federal Highways, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it was the first one done in the state of California. In District 1 did it, looking at examples of projects that might have to be done due to climate change, and one we selected for Mendocino County was, in fact, this area. And if I remember correctly, the kind of mitigations that they were talking about back then was, okay, keep it where it is and reinforce it from sea level rise or or enhance the structure from wave battering and raise it if you have to. And then the other alternative will just bridge it, put that big long viaduct over the impacted area and let the water go back and forth. And the third one was retrenching, going back further inland, which would be kind of the Windy Hollow Road concept. So it all ties into work that we did 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was
Something like that.
2014, and yeah, it really, this particular location did include all of those different concepts for adaptation strategies.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And again, next question.
And
I had.
that study is available. It's on the Caltrans website also. It's not
Okay.
it's not on the Garcia River web portal, but it is on the front of the District 1 website.
Okay. Oh yeah, the last question I had was just, is there anyone known that's particularly opposed to alternative 4, which looks like kind of the duh thing to do? I mean, it's, you know, looks sensible, but is there anyone really dead set against it, or?
I don't know that there's anybody who's dead set against it. I know that there are some people who have individual, preferences for other alternatives, but I'm not aware of anybody who's dead set against any of the alternatives.
I think at the Point Arena City Council, you had a little tab of support and oppose, and I think there were a couple of comments you got opposing number 4. I don't know who they are, and maybe they don't even know, but it was just initial commenting on these alternatives. And who knows, it may be they didn't like the specific route of alternative 4. They wanted to go, we don't know why there is that opposition at this point.
Yeah, I don't recall anything that was grave or very strong opposition.
Okay.
But,
Thank you. That's all I have.
Larry.
I was interested in Richard Shoemaker's comment when he wrote a letter to, I guess, the Caltrans, and he recommends 1 and 4. So what's the economic consequences for the city of Point Arena if you go with 2 or 3? I mean, it's just because it doesn't go close to town or it doesn't go into town. He seems to, or the letter intimates that 1 and 4 is the one that the council has.
Can I possibly answer that? Because that letter is a result of council members' input, and Richard sent that along to Caltrans for comment. The primary reason 2 and 3 are just not suitable for Point Arena is Point Arena owns the south 1.1 to 1.5 miles of Windy Hollow Road. It connects with another side road called Riverside Drive, and then would make a terrible intersection at the existing Highway 1 in town. So there would have to be a humongous infrastructure upgrade with a lot more closely confined properties and easements to make that truly viable. The other problem is as you look at that Windy Hollow to the south there, that Gasker Slough rides all the way up, and the existing Windy Hollow basically sits on that unstable land. So it would, I don't know how that would impact highway standards. I'll leave that to Rex. But as far as the comment, particularly to 1 and 4, at the time that letter was written back in January, or the meeting we had that led up to the letter, it was a split decision that the council, to please the community at the time, before we had more information in Caltrans' presentation, was that rather than just stick to 1, we would support 1 and 4. And that was in January. And since Caltrans' presentation and more public input, the more logical choice came down to number 4, alternative 4. Some questions that were answered and might not have been anticipated by this council was what would happen to the existing Highway 1? Would it be turned over to the local farmers And no, in fact, typically, we were told it would be turned over to a local agency in good use and repair. And one of the options in number 4 that the report doesn't really illustrate is that the existing Highway 1 could actually be an intersection at Gasker Creek. So local dairies would still be able to utilize the older Highway 1 should Alternative 4 be adopted.
Thank you.
That's it. Okay, I'd like to get comment from the public if they want to come up and speak.
May I come up and speak?
Yes.
Please sign in, sir.
Thank you for having me here. My name is Jaime Covarrubia, Tribal Chair for Manchester Band of Pomo Indians. And, you know, we've sat at this table. I sat down with the liaisons a few years ago with Caltrans. We talked about, you know, how we can move this project forward. This project's been started since I was 14 years old. Here I stand in front of you, I'm 38. It's, you know, been quite some time. We're still sitting here talking about it. One of the stories I always go back to is a couple of years ago we had a death on that road. You know, we had an individual who traveled between reservations. He didn't have a vehicle, he walked daily in between both of them. We found him a couple of years ago on the side of the road, you know, laying there for 2 days. Had we, you know, started this project years ago, we could have, you know, helped save one death. You know, and I've always asked, what's the price on death? You know, and I asked a few folks that. Some had numbers, most don't. You know, and it comes back to, you know, what I personally think is it's going to help the community out. It's not solely about my tribe. Yes, it's going to help my tribe get back and forth, but it's going to help the schools. It's going to help all public safety with the transit to get to have better response times. You know, and I think that's really important. I think that's the most important thing that we should be actually talking about when it comes to this bridge is that, you know, saving people's lives is what this bridge will do. It also, you know, I've worked extensively with the mayor also, you know, and trying to, you know, come up with solutions. We're trying to bridge the community back together. You know, prior to me, you know, I've always heard that there's not a lot of communication open with other leaders, with the county, with the state, whatever it may be. But, you know, this bridge is, I worked with BIA about it. You know, we've come up to a deal where my tribe, we just want something to get across the river in times of need. You know, we're not worried about the bells and whistles, but I'm pretty sure that, you know, with the Federal Highway Administration, with Caltrans, public safety is the #1 aspect. And I totally agree with that. And I had a council member say, we just want to get across the bridge. You know, just put up a 1-lane bridge. We've had an estimate with BIA coming up to about, you know, I think it was 5.5 million a few years ago. Now I'm pretty sure we're probably double that, of course, you know, with just putting up a 200-foot span bridge with some abutments and just getting across the river in times of need. You know, and I personally like number 4. We've talked about it, you know. It cuts through a lot of territory that is uncharted. Yeah, there's going to be, you know, some land acquisition there. But I think that, you know, I think that's the best solution that we have right now on the table. So, you know, that's what I'm coming forth with. I'm coming forth with what my tribe said as a tribal member and as a individual that lives in Manchester. I get stuck in Point Arena, my house is in Manchester, I got a long drive ahead of me. Fortunately, I have folks on both sides, so, you know, I can stay at their homes, but not everybody has that. There's not a lot of hotels there, there's not a lot of services there, you know, so with that being said, you know, I think this bridge it's imperative to get started and start moving forward on it. Thank you.
Anyone else like to come up and speak? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to you guys one last time. Any further comments? Okay, you happy?
What else, I mean, what else can we do here but just
Well, I think
support?
There's no action.
I think from here, you know, that as most of you are aware, when you look at analysis for new bridges and new routes, eventually they'll conclude this feasibility study, and they'll select 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe all 4 of them to look at, including the no bill, to eventually go through the environmental process. And as you're all aware, usually you need to look at more than one. So I think what they're going to do is probably, I should be letting Rex take over, is to hear all the comments from different entities, including the city and the county and the, I know Howard's sitting back there thinking about, well, if they do this and abandon that, I'm going to be stuck with the county road I want to maintain. Mm-hmm. So those kind of things all are part of it, as well as geotechnical you brought up. So they're going to sift through all this over the summer and come up with 1, 2, 3, or 4 things to carry on in the environmental process eventually, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. There are a whole lot of unknowns still, so we're going to be looking further. We would, it would be great if there are alternatives that we can conclusively, have a consensus that we don't need to continue studying them. Then that sort of reduces the universe of things that we have to look at. But even before we get to conclusively eliminating anything, I think we still have to make sure that we determine that consensus does exist on the part of both the technical folks and the political folks, if you will. So one of the things that, in addition to determining what more we need to know and what more we need to study, is we need to look at how we might be able to fund next steps and different various components of what we're looking at, because depending on what it is that's proposed, we may be able to find funding for one piece or another piece, but maybe not for the whole thing. So those kinds of questions will continue to be there, and we will continue to try to answer them as we move forward. There's likely to be a range of shorter term things that we can pursue, and some longer term things that we are going to be recognizing will take longer to pursue. And as we finalize the study, I think some of those will be identified and made a little more clear.
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, just to wrap things up here, as I said, the comment period was supposed to have been done, and I went ahead and made staff comments without bringing this to the board, and that is included in your packet as well. What I did was I was involved in other things when this thing came out in December and January, and I finally looked at it real quick and went through and wow, I like number 4, even looking at the route for a number of reasons. And then I thought, well, I don't like 2 and 3, and I think we talked last time about my history of growing up as a traffic engineer. I didn't like that intersection that the city just described, and how you have 2 immediate intersections right there before you get back to Main Street in Point Arena, and I expressed that concern. So I looked at it all and then formed my own conclusion. And I already had Richard Shoemaker's letter in my hand, but I didn't read it. And then I read his and thought, wow, good. At least I'm in concurrence with what City of Point Arena comments. And so I just added my own, and this is your opportunity as a board to comment further if you have some other different opinion other than what I've already conveyed.
Want to say something?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well,
Just
before I
makes sense.
move on to the next item, I want to thank. I didn't know my microphone was lit up. Anyway, I want to thank the tribe for coming over and talking to us. I was listening and saying that the city of Point Arena, glad you guys came over and go through things.
Can I make a quick comment?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm all the way on the other side from you. You know, if there's interest, I do think it would be good if we put, you know, a cover letter of support from our board for the comments that staff made. If you've read the comments and agree with them, but I think, you know, having our approval of the staff comments that went forward, if Phil thinks that's worthwhile. You know, I read them and I felt that they were very reasonable and would be, you know, sounds like what we have all listened to and agreed to.
We can do that.
Yeah.
And if I just may say so, if you wish to give individual comments also, that's a possibility. So I did so, and I think we all could do that too. I think the more comments, the better.
I agree.
And I just want to say, you know, that when we talked about this at Point Arena the other night, you know, it was brought up that, you know, that at one time the BAIA was definitely willing to fund that bridge on the Windy Hollow route, and I guess it just wasn't pursued one way or another. And one of my comments was, well, there's another funding source potentially for Alternative 4 if we can get them in some kind of a cost share relationship. It may bring the overall cost to other public agencies down even better, and look even better benefit cost wise. I'm talking about Alternative 4.
Okay. That's about it then. We'll move on to item number 6. Consideration adoption of resolution number M 2018-blank, because we haven't numbered it yet, supporting Proposition 69, a constitutional amendment to protect transportation funds from being diverted, and opposing the repeal of Senate Bill 1, the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017.
Catching up with you here. There should be a staff report. That was developed regarding this. Real quick, we've all talked about Senate Bill 1, and which is the recent gas tax. Probably should be putting that in parentheses every time we talk about it, so ordinary people are not going to know what Senate Bill 1 is, so got to start doing that. But first was this Proposition 69, and those of you that have been around a little while will remember that some problems we had in the 90s and late 80s regarding the state legislature taking money from the funding that was available for transportation and sticking it in the general fund to bridge those funding gaps that we often had back then. So what happened was we, after a number of years of doing that, and there were times when our state transportation improvement program had zero funds, and it was because those funds were rated. We wound up actually with Proposition 45 that said, well, you can't do that anymore. We need these transportation funds to actually go to transportation. and it said, at that time, however, most of the funds were not so much from the gas tax, but most of the funding that was available, because most of the gas tax didn't even fund the SHOP program that the state had. But most of the funding, because this was an era where the cost of fuel was going way up, the actual gas, the sales tax on the gas was generating most of the revenue that went in to fund transportation improvements. And then, so Proposition 45 took care of that. Well, you can't raid, the sales tax off gasoline, because that was most attractive to the state. They saw these revenues building up and they took it. Then someone had a great idea a few years ago about this gas tax swap, and we're going to trade the sales tax on gasoline back to the general fund to give us back, elevate, to give us back a stable source of funding through fuel tax again. It will be set at a certain rate. So now, Senate Bill 45 is still on the books, but it doesn't apply to anything. So the control on the legislature stealing the gas tax funds are still there, because that's what we depend on again now, not the sales tax on gasoline. So so that's the rationale for Proposition 69 that will put in statute the fact, constitutional amendment saying you can't do this. So the other one is something that we've already talked about at previous board meetings regarding the potential repeal of Senate Bill 1, which is just now starting to have some effect in the amount of revenues that are available for the counties and the cities for their streets and roads networks. And also, our immediate impact here, as I told you before, with Senate Bill 1 was that our recently adopted STIP, that was just adopted last month by the CTC, California Transportation Commission, and I remember telling you that I was telling everybody we're not going to have any money for new capital projects until probably about 2022, because we had a $8 million debt to retire from what we still owed from the bypass project. And guess what? We had $3 million that went forward to fund different components of several different projects all around this county because of that. So that's how it benefits us directly. I wasn't aware exactly when all of the different types of funds that are components of Senate Bill 1 went into effect until, here we are back in Point Arena again, until the city manager asked me to confirm something that one of the council persons in Point Arena had learned at the League of California Cities meeting about, we expect, they were told that, over a 10-year period that Point Arena was supposed to get about $128,000 or something over the course of 10 years that they wouldn't have had otherwise without the gas tax increase. And I looked at what they've been receiving so far, and it looked like about $2,500 a year or something. And so I go, wait a minute here. So I spent quite a few hours going through and building a little chart and looking at, when do all these things kick in? Because there's about 5 different dates when the different funding components finally kick in until they get up to a point. And I spent several hours looking at the different dates and adding up, doing some ratios about how much to get now as with 1.1 billion extra compared to 1.6 here, compared to another 1.8 billion statewide is coming in here, then subtracting out the payback from the state back to the transportation fund. This was prior Senate Bill 45. all that money was scheduled to be paid back, and that's part of the deal, is paying back the past debt. Add it all up, and not knowing when everything's exactly going to kick in and being collected, I came up with about $120,000 over a 10-year period. And League of California Cities calculated 128, so it's certainly within my margin of error. So I kind of, oh yeah, it does add up to that, but they're receiving almost nothing yet, just a little bit of money. And so for the size of a city of Point Arena, that makes a difference. And you know, of course, Ukiah and Fort Bragg and Willits are all much larger, and so you're starting talking about some real money you can actually do things with. So just wanted to throw that in there, that the locals, other than the ones that are self-help, that actually have their own self-help tax, have already realized their $100,000 a year that they never had before for projects. So all these things are components that you really haven't seen much benefit from yet, and certainly you haven't seen it on anything that you can point to that's already constructed yet, because even those who haven't been here very long know we work in dog years. It takes a long time to get things down on the street. So what we're asked to do is because there is a movement to repeal, is to see if this agency wants to join a coalition in support of the existing gas tax. And this is one of those precarious positions that staff is in sometimes. We're not going to say what you should do. You're all elected people. You make your own decisions. I can tell you what we have or will have with it, and I can tell you roughly now, at least for Point Arena, I haven't filled out the chart for the other ones yet, what you wouldn't have available to you if this legislation is somehow repealed, either legislatively or through the initiative process. Whenever you get involved with like things like tax measures and things like this, staff cannot go out and support these things unless it's on our own time. All we can say is about how much we would get if we had it, or in this case, now that we have it, or how much we will get, and how much the deficit will be if you don't. And as elected bodies, you can go ahead and you could determine to join this coalition that will put your MCOG's stamp on it, saying, yeah, we want to do this, or you may not, and it's your choice. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about it. There's a resolution that accompanies this.
Any questions? Go ahead.
I don't have questions, but I just have a comment. I certainly am in support of the resolution, and support of us joining the coalition. The Board of Supervisors did already pass or write a letter in support of the Prop 69 and against repealing SB1. And I think it would be helpful. Jan and I were recently at the bCALCOG conference, and there was a lot of talk about both of these efforts and what we can do locally, because this is not going to be something that's going to be an easy decision statewide. It's going to come down to every person's vote. So I think that what would be useful is for all of us to, if we decide to support this, to really talk to people about what's going on. So I think for us, what would be useful is that list you're kind of talking about. I mean, if you could provide us with a few bullet facts for us to have on locally what things we could go forward with if we have it versus not, just so we have some of those good bullet points, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll fill out the rest of the chart. I just did it for Point Arena first since they asked.
Right, and I don't know that money, honestly, is always the answer for talking to somebody. I think it's projects. And so, if we have an idea of, this many more, you know, roads paved or potholes filled, which is obviously more of Howard giving us some of those bullet points. But, you know, I think some of the projects that we couldn't go after, that we wouldn't be able to go after, I think that probably has more impact telling people, so.
And always a factor here with most of these entities are going to be using it on maintenance and rehabilitation, and we certainly know that our pavement condition index leaves a lot to be desired and needs to be elevated quite a bit to get back to even to where it's in the average level.
Right.
We're well below average. Poor pavements almost everywhere.
Any other questions or comments?
Excuse me, I do. If I can get the frog out of my throat. I look forward to Mr. Dow's sell job on me to support this, because I do support the SB1 part of it. The other part, I'd like to discuss a little bit more. But I suspect there's some vulnerability to these passing, vulnerability to the mood of the state on certain things. And I'd like to tell a little story here for a minute and get a little feedback from my colleagues that are representing cities here. The most recent discussion of this kind of issue in the city of Ukiah is, I suspect, going to be controversial in a year or so. But it's the general subject matter of that will affect, I think, how people will vote on this in November, especially if the issue gets more visibility by then. So what's happened, and what I'd appreciate feedback from colleagues on, is there was a workshop, they call it. It's not a formal council meeting, or it is a formal meeting, but it's not as formal as a city council meeting. So we had a workshop a month or more ago. And this was about how to spend the Measure Y funds. And that was Measure Y was City of Ukiah's half-cent sales tax for road maintenance and such. And an outline was given to what roads are being worked on and which ones are planned for the next year's budget. And then came a look at the year after that. And for the first time, there was a, in actual tangible presentation, what is debatably a switch from what voters approved. And when Measure Y was approved, it's a year and a half ago now, November, a year and a half ago. So instead of spending the money, all the money that year on maintenance and repair of roads, staff has decided it would be beneficial for economic development to rebuild and redesign the intersection of Perkins, it's East Perkins Street and Orchard, right next to the freeway, because there's a traffic backup there during rush hour, and there is. However, I don't remember anything in what we told the public back in the era of Measure Y passing that we were going to do such things. It was for fixing streets. So the issue of government baiting and switching or changing internally, because they can sometimes change what voters intended, is an issue which barely came up a month ago in this presentation, but it's headed for, some just further discussion and possible controversy in Ukiah. I'm curious if anything like that has happened in the other cities. And what this brings up is the general attitude and mood of the public about, well, is government spending on the right things? Is this money that's coming in, it's talked about new funding in here. I highlighted the word new transportation funds. So is it new funds only then? Is it going to go to maintenance and repair, which is what I think the public cares about? Or is stuff going to be built where some people don't want to see it built? And the mood of the public on that issue will be very influential in how the vote goes in November. So if anybody has any comments on that, I'd appreciate them.
If I may respond, Mr. Vice Chair.
Go ahead, Phil.
I don't remember the name of the whole act, but one of the parts of it is and Accountability Act.
Yes, it's in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And boy, have we been finding out about that. There's all kinds of reporting now. It's falling on the County Department of Transportation and the city engineers to account with what they're doing with these extra funds. So they have to be accounted for separately from their traditional gas tax sources that they get year in and year out. And so there's accountability standards in there, report what you're going to do with them, and then there's, I think, a yearly reporting, and then there's closeout reporting after you've completed the project. So the legislature has put a very close watch on what they're doing with those funds. And so there's very little latitude once you identify what you're going to use it for. You can substitute projects, but they have to be, I believe, like-type projects, and then you can go ahead and do it if something stalls you from performing what you want to do at the beginning. You can go ahead and do an alternate project, but then you have to go back and report that you changed it and explain why. So there's lots of reporting involved. It's no free money.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the city reps?
Larry?
We have published in the paper several times about what the city of Willits is going to do with a portion of the money, and we're going to use it for resurfacing of some of the roads in our community, along with our half-cent sales tax. And we've published that 2 or 3 times, and we've only got positive from it from our community. So I mean, it's out there what we're going to do with ours. So I mean, that just headed it out to made it a lot easier for us, because that question is not going around in our area. So.
And I reported to the California Transportation Commission what you were going to do with your money.
Yeah.
Because believe me, they know where Willits is.
Yes, I know they do. Big time.
I just want to tell you this, Steve. We had issues in Fort Bragg. It basically is going to come down to the council, because the council is the one that can approve how they spend the money. Staff can make up any project they want, or, I mean, they can build a playground with that money on paper, but it's going to take the council. It's going to take the vote. We had a bike and ped path project, and we found out that we didn't have enough money. It changed to the Chestnut Street Corridor project, and we ended up transferring $500,000 of gas tax to build an 8-foot wide bike and ped path, when there was only $32,000 worth of actual asphalt repair done on the existing street, and it didn't go over very well, but the council chose to do that. So I don't know how your actual ballot measure is written, but it's going to come down to the council. So, but before I hear any motions, I think we should let the public speak. Anybody want to speak on this? I got somebody coming up.
Under advice of legal counsel, I cannot take a position as far as in favor or not. Howard DeShield with the County Transportation Department. But I can give you a few facts, and I can reiterate some of the things Director Dow said. As Supervisor Krosky just indicated, the board took a support level on this. And for the county, and you know, Phil probably explained it better than I could, but the funding is good funding. It starts a little slow and ramps up for some reason. I'm not quite sure of all the intricacies of that, but what I told the board, and this is public, is that over 18 years, I believe this funding source, SB1, will produce new money, what they call the road maintenance and repair account. It's a portion of the Road Repair and Accountability Act, which is the whole SB1. It'll produce about $100 million over 18 years in new revenue. So that's $5.5 million a year on average. However, for the first few years, it's much smaller. So far this year, I think we've received about $138,000. We think by fiscal year end, we might get about $900,000. So that's a long ways from 5.5. But that portion of this, and Phil's correct, there's another portion which increases the STIP, and obviously he represented that real well. There is this portion, though, for local streets and roads of truly new money. So, you know, that is brand new. There is also a portion that simply takes care of, and Phil called it Senate Bill 45, but it's really the old Prop 42. It was the gap. Thank you. It was 42. That's what you meant to say. Thank you. There was an increment.
Get me back here.
Young
people are supposed to go.
Phil, you're never wrong. So, but I just want to make sure. So this was
in the 40s.
This was an increment of gas tax that was not excise tax. You know, we've always had these fixed excise taxes, so much per gallon. And they began in the 90s with this Prop 42 excise tax that rolled into the general fund, and we fought over and passed a lot of propositions. But the bottom line of it is, when the price per oil went way down in 2014, the county dropped out $2 million of our regular budget that was coming from that funding. And the county supervisors will remember that I was asking them for general fund to backfill that, and they did that and have been doing that for a few years. So what this bill will do by fiscal year 2019 and 2020 is actually put that money back all the way, and we will get more and more every year of this new local, you know, street and road new money, this road maintenance and repair account. So while I cannot take a position or tell you to support any proposition, because council has told me as a public employee I cannot electioneer, I just want to say that there's quite a bit of money for the county, for county roads. Phil has told you there's quite a bit of money for STIP, which is all our other state transportation improvement projects. So I could answer questions on a answer basis if you have any. I will dovetail on to what Director Dow said. The accountability part required us for this road maintenance and repair account to specifically develop a list and put it in our county budget, which we did last year. That bill is now amended to say that we can do that in a public meeting by resolution, which we are bringing forward this next month. Those are required every year. And then Director Dow is right. I have to report on that to the CTC. And so he's also right. The board has to look at that and approve it. I would have liked to have put all of the new RMRA into just road paving, but in fact I listed the storm damage we had from the disasters last year and some projects for a couple reasons. Number one, we don't have back the money we lost in 2014, but that was all done in a public meeting, and the board had to vote on that and agree to it. The board also said that as soon as 1920, you know, fiscal year 2019, 2020 comes along, they're really wanting to see all that money go into road repair, and that's a directive the board or council gives staff. So that would be my answer to that. And then we have to, on top of that, give that to the CTC, and it's going to go on some website somewhere. So there'll be a lot of, Phil's right, Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017 was SB1. So that's my, good.
I have a question, actually.
Okay.
And perhaps this has been answered in some form, but what specifically does Proposition 69 do to increase accountability for SB1?
I think, again, not a lawyer, I know a little bit about it, but I think the constitutional, there are already safeguards in SB1 that basically said it can't be taken for any other purpose other than roads. But I think this proposition further makes that very clear. And again, I'm not an attorney, you'd have to get the text out and read it, but it's a further safeguard. I really think there was already enough safeguards in SB1, but it's a further safeguard.
I think there was only like 60% that was constitutionally protected with SB1, and this will constitutionally protect the other 40% of the funds.
Thank you.
She went to CALCOG.
I did. I learned.
Okay, any other comments from the public? With no one coming up, I'm open for motions.
I'll make one last comment here.
Hold on.
Under number 7 here, it says SB1 will raise approximately, 5.4 billion for blah 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 blah, comma, reduce congestion. I'll vote for it anyway, but just I worry about that a little bit. So anyway.
Okay.
Oh, and the recommended action is to
Action on it.
so no action at all. We have the option of
No, it's-
a resolution, though.
Yeah,
Yes.
motion to consider adoption of resolution.
Okay. I don't mind moving that.
Okay, do we have a
That we
second?
adopt as is. Any other questions?
Hold on. Okay, do I have a second?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
And the resolution,
Roll call.
the staff report points out that the resolution would cause us to join the Coalition to Protect Local Transportation Improvements. So
Correct.
we'd go on the list of agencies that support that. Are we ready for a vote?
Roll call.
Okay. Director Jackman,
Yes.
Scalmanini,
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Jamalino,
Yes.
Wasserman.
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
and Krosky.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we move to item number 7, consideration of alternatives for improvements to US 101 North State Street interchange.
This is the meeting where we talk about things that staff has been working on for a while that you guys don't know about. This is part 2. You have a written staff report that explains what we have been looking into, and we've been working, Director DeShiel and I have been talking with Caltrans for the last several months, and the long-term goal is to improve that 101 northbound ramp, from North State Street that everybody who lives around here knows about and has to take extra care in getting on and looking behind your back somehow. I explained a little bit what some of the complications were there, and it just isn't a simple fact that you can widen the structure, the northern structure, because it's at a tilt to accommodate the super elevation going around the curve, and it's already too low, so you just can't widen it down to the north, make the bridge even lower. So the only way that you can do anything structurally with that would be to widen that structure towards the south and shift the lanes around to provide more clearance as you go around that curve to allow more of room for a dedicated channelization to come up and join the through traffic. That's a presumption we have had for a number of years after the last time that we kind of loosely, at least I did loosely, talk to Caltrans about it. They did a little study a few years ago and came up with $5 million. That was 7 or 8 years ago, and that's where it sat. And then just recently, Caltrans has contacted us and said we want to look at another alternative, and they came up with another alternative which would actually move the on-ramp to the north of the structure, so that if you're going north on North State Street to get on the freeway, you there'd be a left-hand turn pocket there, and then a ramp going up around the motel there that's on the corner and merging further downstream. At one point, in particular, Director DeShiel pointed out there's, the location where there's ongoing development there at the old Masonite site, and looking at trying to match up the on-ramp with where a proposed intersection or junction would be built with for access on the development of the old Masonite site, and perhaps between the motel and the ambulance center there, it seemed like it might work. But Caltrans looked at the time it takes to merge into the through traffic, and there were some constraints further down at the Masonite undercrossing there that precluded that from happening. So we're really looking at a couple of different alternatives. The old one, which was widen out the structure and move all the two lanes of through traffic further to the south and to the west to allow a longer merge lane, or the new one that Caltrans came up with. Well, this is separated out, have a direct one left turn pocket, and go around it. And I remember when I saw that, I pointed out the fallacy of that to one of my staff, to Nafili. I said, problem with that is that I didn't think about it, of that first. So, but it seems pretty obvious now that you look at it. But, so I think that we've been looking at the pros and cons of doing these things, and this is another one of those things that Rex may want to comment on immediately, but they're going to be looking at over the next several months. So, but
Turn that on. I don't have anything today.
But this is kind of an initial look at rejuvenating interest in an old problem, and they came up with another alternative solution to be looking at. So at least we have more than one to look at, and there's likely to be cost differences and safety concerns that will have to be looked at as we go along. And I, of course, want to point out that Director DeShiel is here, and these have been telephone conversations with people in Eureka to date, but wanted to keep you up to date on this because it's like I said, this came up a few months ago, and well, it's only started this year, so it can't be very long. And wanted to let you know what we're looking at, and that's probably enough for introduction. And I know that Mr. DeShiel is back here too, and he might have some things to say about when the appropriate time comes.
I would, I guess, chime in while I have a second, just to note that, just to recognize the importance of the partnership in terms of really the interests of the county, and the county looking at North State Street and how North State Street operates, and having that as a priority in the regional transportation plan. There's a real opportunity here for us to work together and improve operations, both for North State Street and for the interchange itself. So we're glad to be sitting down and looking at everybody's interests on this.
Okay, I have a few questions. First of all, when you look at these aerial photos, you guys at Caltrans kind of have in the back of your mind which one of these is going to cost more. Is there any guesstimate on the cost?
Not from me. Actually, Phil and Howard have been working more closely with the engineer on this particular problem or project than I have.
Okay.
I think there might be some preliminary costs that have been drawn out.
Well,
I was just curious. It's not a deal breaker for me. I was just curious.
we haven't been paying too much attention to the cost. We're trying to figure out what would work as far as moving the traffic volumes and providing a safe facility at this point. And to tell you the truth, I can't remember talking about cost at this point.
Okay.
I mean, you can kind of eyeball things and say, well, what's going to cost more, whitening out structures?
Well, yeah, the structure's smaller, but you have a lot of pavement to put down. The other alternative is a lot of road work.
Or versus the road work, and you can kind of put two and two together, but there's putting in the project, the ramp on the west side, however, is a new roadway, and whether there's really enough room to squeeze it in there without any kind of property take is another issue. So I don't think all of those things have been worked out at this point.
My last question's an easy one. I don't live here. What's the accident data? Is that thing pretty dangerous? Because I don't live here and I don't know. Has there been a lot of, is there accident data that's kind of pushing this as far as safety goes?
Don't take this wrong, but I think it's been disappointing.
And the reason why is because I don't live here, so I don't know. If you haven't wrecks there all the time,
it
that's
hasn't, I don't have the details, but it hasn't been as bad as you might think it would be.
Okay.
Disappointing in the fact that, yeah, unfortunately, that's some of the way they calculate it, and so we get actual funding to take care of.
Because I know when they diverted all of the through traffic, because Caltrans, you put signs up to divert all through traffic into the fast lane to kind of alleviate a lot of the issues with the short on-ramps are very short in that whole area. So,
well, I think there was a long history, especially of sideswipe type collisions that don't necessarily generate as much funding for a fix as some of the more serious type of collisions.
Yeah.
And we have done, you mentioned the signage, we have done a whole bunch of incremental tweaks to things, changes to the striping, changes to the guardrail, changes to the abutments and things like that. But and the impression that I have, and I don't have exact numbers in front of me, but the impression that I have is that a lot of those incremental changes have had some effect, but they're clearly not going to solve the issue in the long term.
Oh, that's good.
And I think that, one of the things that are kind of an intangible here is a lot of people I speak with that are uncomfortable with that on-ramp, they go north and get on at Mendocino instead. Mm-hmm. So I think you end up seeing a lot more traffic going north on that North State and get on at the next one.
Similarly, close calls. Close calls don't show up in the statistics.
Right. Mm-hmm. She's pushing the project, the problem to somewhere else by having the existing facility the way it is.
Yeah, because if you improve this, it will change, because I always go down to the next one down.
Right.
I won't go on that one either. So, any other questions or comments up here?
Well, a couple comments. Number one, I use that all the time. It is one of those accidents waiting to happen.
Yes.
Without the statistics to bear it out per se, but it's still, it's one of those talked about things around the danger of it. And number three, my concern might be more with county issue than the state issue, because it's the last line of paragraph 1 in the staff report mentions Lover's Lane, but the intersection of North State Street and KUKI Lane and Lover's Lane isn't isn't mentioned here, but that's where the truck stop is being rebuilt. And that's a potential, to me, the biggest potential problem with this particular part of town. And it's slightly off the map. And it doesn't necessarily involve the state, except unless people are backed up on North State Street because they can't get to the state intersection because of trucks trying to make the turn into, off of North State Street on the KUK line and maybe Lover's Lane.
Well,
so
part of Director DeShield's plan is he's concerned about, I think, a total about 6 or 7 different intersections, and leading. Well, as a result of bringing this up, this is something that was going to be done anyway, but there's probably a real immediate need to spend some funds on and doing a traffic analysis through this new modeling effort, this new model that we have, the microsim, that is able to look at very specific types of intersections and very specific data at each one of these intersections, and do a model along that whole section of North State Street that will feed in to Caltrans's decision on what is the best way to approach this, and looking at all of those intersections in addition to what's going to be working best for the on-ramp at North State Street. And that is something that I intend to bring probably next month regarding participating in the funding effort with the county to do some modeling in this area, so that we'll, as best we can at this point, plan for the future, and when all these things seem to be happening at that, in and around that intersection.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you stand up here, Nafili.
Later in your packet, there's a staff report sort of recapping what happened with the 2018 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. But one thing from that was restoration of a project that focuses on that intersection that you're talking about at KUKI Lane. So, and I think it was actually the restoration of that project in the STIP that sort of encouraged Caltrans to move forward with making improvements at this location also, so that they can, work together. So there are things happening there as well.
And that's restored to, right now, tentatively begin in 2021, right? The first phase of funding? Yeah. Yeah, I have it, the recommended STIP right here. So the timing is right to get out in front of that problem now. And Caltrans is ready to work on a solution for the interchange. We're going to make sure that the local network is coordinated, as Rex started saying, with what needs to be done at the interchange.
Okay, any other comments before I open it up to the public? Go ahead.
So I was unable to find in here, but alternative 1 discusses the earthquake retrofit to the northbound lane, and in alternative 2, it doesn't appear to be addressed. Is there a scheduled retrofit for that overpass anyway, or was that only in lieu of this project?
I don't know.
And when I say retro, I mean earthquake retrofit.
I would have to research that and get back to you.
Is that something that gets triggered by the change in the road?
Probably is, if you're modifying something.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the program itself is fairly well, defined, and basically they went through and went structure by structure by structure, and so I'm not sure what the implications would be in terms of any work that we would do. There's thresholds for when things need to be brought up to different standards, and as far as the seismic stuff, it's not an area that I know off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Okay. Here he comes.
Howard DeShield, County Director of Transportation. So Director Dow pretty much said all. I'll try not to take a lot of time and repeat it. You know, this is a pretty key area of the county system because the bare land at the Old Masonite project, which by board direction we're now referring to the Friends of Liberty development, the possibility of things coming on Lover's Lane, the Brush Street Triangle. It seems like there's just stuff out there. We're happy to see that Caltrans is looking at their two intersections. I don't have it in front of me, but in 2008, the report Caltrans did say that the accident rate at both the north and southbound occur at a higher percentage rate than is the average across the state. So there's your, it might not be awful, terrible fatalities, thank goodness, but I think Director Jackman's right. It's a accumulation of accidents. The county is happy that we'll be coming back. You know, I'm going to ask the TAC to help fund a more comprehensive study of the 6 intersections between Empire Drive and Ore Springs Road. That's going to become pretty congested, especially with the Friends of Liberty project, and 2 of those intersections are the Caltrans. We're going to look at some radical things like maybe winding Lover's Lane back into a larger interchange with, you know, the 101 on and off and North State Street. There's some ideas out there, and that's part of why, you know, I'd like to spend about $100,000 on doing a really, really comprehensive study of that, concurrent with you've already given your support to a grant we received to look at the extension of Orchard Street, clear up through Brush Street Triangle and on. So that we want to do concurrently, which is why I'll be asking, you know, MCOG to help share in that. And those are coming up real soon, and we hope to have good planning that produces a really well thought out improvement there, because this is a truly congested, truly key area for the county system, and it seems to be the area that's subject to the most growth and change, at least in the immediate future. So did I cover everything, Phil, I needed to? Or?
I wasn't listening to you.
Thanks, Phil.
I knew you'd cover what I did.
So the time frame is the next few years, the coming 1, 2, 3 years.
Well, as Nafili indicated, there's a STIP project for the north and southbound interchanges. The development at the Friends of Liberty, as you've noticed, there's a foundation going up there. There is some building activity, so that we hope is proceeding. So I'm hopeful that in the next year to 18 months, we'll have some really good studies on Orchard Street and North State Street, that area, you know, Ore Springs Road to Empire. Mm-hmm. And then we'll follow that up in 2021 with a comprehensive design work for the 101 interchange. And my hope is any improvements to those other county intersections, one of them, a leg is shared with the city at Empire, would all be studied. They would be micro-simmed, and we would have some really good information on that. So my goal is to have a consultant working on that this summer. We plan to have a public meeting before the Board of Supervisors to present that. We'll certainly invite the City Council, because pretty important for both of us. I also really appreciate, this is where I unabashedly, you know, brown nose the Executive Director. I really appreciate the financial support that I'll be asking MCOG for. So.
If I may continue, the money that's already in the State Transportation Improvement Program for that particular intersection area, the interchange, it starts off with environmental, packet of money for environmental in 2021, and the next year there's already program money for design money the following year. So that's what we need to be preparing for. The money he's talking about, that's why I wasn't listening to him, because I figured out I was thinking about what I was going to say next, and I don't know how many years ago I came to the board and presented the case that out of the Regional Surface Transportation Program funds that we receive annually, that we distribute to each one of the entities, the 4 cities in the county, on a formula basis, that you've been historically trying to keep your head above water with your maintaining your streets and roads. Been taking a certain amount off the top to participate in what I call the partnership funding program that some of you still have heard about. And the initial motivation I had for taking money off the top and building an account up that could be used to help jointly fund some projects around the county that needed help, that anyone, it would be hard for any individual entity to come up with the funding. And the motivation for doing that was in 2005, we did a study of all the interchanges in the Ukiah Valley. And I started looking at, well, who's going to pay for this stuff? And Caltrans's attitude, you know, and I'm not saying it's wrong, is that, hey, 1962 we built this perfectly good freeway with perfectly good interchanges, and you, Mr. Mayor, you built all this development around it, and now it ain't so good no more. And you don't expect the people from the rest of the state of California to pay for this, or so. There's going to be some local funds that are going to have to go into improving the interchanges and access to the freeway, and that's what they expect. And I looked ahead and said, well, how's the city of Ukiah, and in the northern part of town, how's the county going to come up with these funds at the appropriate time when we need to expend money on improving the interchanges? Now, fortunately, Talmadge Road was one of those that looked 10 years down the road, and we'll get to do something there, and we have some help in funding those improvements now, but we still need to do something with North State Street, as well as Lake Mendocino, as well as Perkins Street interchange. We have been, there's another thing, don't take me wrong, but we've been fortunate because of the big recession we had, that it gave us about 10 years longer than I thought we'd have, because there's a long period of inactivity and no growth because of the economic situation, and it's starting to build back up now. But we had about a 10-year reprieve, and believe me, we're more than 10 years behind in following that plan. But I've been accumulating a little bit of money every year going in there, and as I said, the original thing that I was thinking about was those interchanges. But what did we do? The first thing that came up that was ready to fund was the Simpson Lane roundabout, and so I participated with the county on that. Then there's been another smaller, just recently, you know, putting some money into the Point Arena ZEV program, the charging station in Point Arena, before that Fort Bragg, and helping fund the gap of a bridge, a pedestrian bridge in Laytonville. Those all fit the role, but wasn't what I had envisioned. But we do have money, and I think a good use of those money is to model what we do first, and then have some money to help with the capital improvements later on if needed.
Okay, I have one more person from the public wants to speak.
My name is Michael Horder. I like what Howard was talking about getting the Liberty property, Masonite property. I worked there for Worked there for 7 years, 8 years, and coming out of Ford Road, there was a half-hour wait to get out of there on the main street to go. So if you were in a planning stage, it'd be a good time to plan on an exit. Because they were talking about a super Walmart a long time ago, and that's what shot that down. Because exiting, you know, same thing with what they're doing at Costco, they're making it do its own on-ramp and there. So it's same. This at the planning stage would be kind of a good idea to start there. With that whole big field opening up, you could come up through there and kind of do something with the exit on that, just looking at that. And the other, you're talking with Lover's Lane, there's a project right now with 120 homes they're trying to put in over there. So yeah, look into the future of that exit too, because that's going to be a big cluster over there too. But that's just that's my 2 cents.
That's the purpose of the modeling we intend to do with and have it consistent with the development plans that are moving forward in that area.
Changing, but just a couple.
Okay.
Thank you. When I first moved here in 1981, you were talking about Lover's Lane development. It isn't only transportation that moves slowly.
Okay, before we move on to the next item, is there any last questions or comments?
Just hopefully it's just to keep you up to date on what staff is doing.
Just one comment, the alternative 2, which talked about relocating the northbound on-ramp west of North State Street. I might have missed this, but somehow I don't see that in any of these drawings, but I don't need to either, but I just...
Well, it should be there.
It's on the
I might
last,
have
it's the last photo.
misread it or something.
If you look just south of where the motel is, you'll see it drawn in.
On the last photo?
I think so.
It's alternative 2 right here.
Yeah.
You have to look for the line. The lines aren't very heavy.
It's light.
There's a left turn pocket and it goes around that way.
And it's the last photo?
I think it's the last one of the series.
Yes, it is in the sequence.
Okay.
Unless we get them out of sequence.
It's also shown in the second to the last as far as the actual northbound ramp.
Okay.
Everybody's happy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll move on to number 8. Appointment of a ad hoc committee to serve during litigation for the Covelo State Route 162 Corridor Multi-Purpose Trail Project, CEQA Challenge.
I'll let Janet handle this. She wrote it when I was down at the CTC meeting.
It's pretty simple, really. We are in a lawsuit over the Covelo Trail project, and it came to our notice when we had our executive committee meeting that some of this discussion is likely confidential, and first of all, I thought I should hold back the minutes until we talked to first our county counsel, and she thought we should ask the attorney on the case, and he explained to me the confidentiality, and so I finished those minutes. You will get them in the next packet, but basically you don't put on the public record those things, those discussions. But it just brought up, well, what if we need to consult with any of our council members during this process? What's the best way to do that? We can have closed sessions. The attorney would need to be present or on the phone with us. And the other way to go is have an ad hoc committee, because that would fit the proper purpose of an ad hoc. It's a short-term issue, a single subject, and that's a simple, practical way to deal with that if we do need to talk to our board members. So that is what County Council recommended that we do on our very next agenda right here today, is to appoint an ad hoc committee of the board for this particular issue. So we are thinking here as staff, probably the 3rd district member, and maybe one or more of our officers. We have a chair and a vice chair. Any other thoughts on that? We can talk about that. Any questions about this? I think I covered the main points of that. So, you know, we can, I guess one thing to add is that as we maybe come to the conclusion of the case, then would be the time to have a closed session of the full board. The full board would get a report, the attorney would be there. And our attorney, Derek Cole, can tell us when it's time to do that. So.
You need two, you want
Yes.
two on this ad hoc?
What do you think? Well,
I would say 2 or 3.
yeah, I was thinking 2 to 3.
Be good to have 3 in case one cannot make it.
Right. That would
Okay.
be practical.
Okay, any interest first for volunteers?
Okay.
Okay, Steve?
Actually, probably be the low priority as far as the overall group, because it's not my area. But the issue interests me, and I know that, I mean, if this is predominantly about a landowner that's kind of in the way, but, you know, it's sort of the route that makes sense is the obvious one, and, you know, there's legal
And
issue over
yeah,
it. So.
you've been involved in the executive discussion that we had, and you're
Yeah.
on that committee, and
Yeah. So I'm interested, but I don't want to take away from anybody that's
Right.
closer to the area. And I
And I'm
don't know.
certainly willing to serve as, you know, since their district is also
Okay,
my
there's
area
two.
of concern anyway.
And I'll just remind you know what happens when an elected person isn't here and there's a committee coming up. I note that the chair is not here.
Oh, yes, sir.
he did
I've been
text me
coming.
back that he wasn't able to make it, so yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So we have 2 volunteers.
So we need one more.
We could conscript the chairman.
I mean, I'm willing to do it.
You
but it's
willing to
just-
do it?
Yeah, when would you think the next meeting is? Because I'm going to be gone for the last 2 weeks
We
of this
don't
month.
even have any on the horizon right now.
Okay.
It's sort of an as-needed.
Yeah, we'd only
All right.
call it together
Put
when
me on
there's a
there.
decision to be made or.
Yeah.
Okay, you have your 3, because I'll do it.
All right.
All right,
So
thank you
we're
very
not
much.
going to talk about Willits being the closest city to the area?
Pardon me?
We're not going to talk about Willits being the closest city.
We can
to the
always talk
I'm
No.
about.
not interested. I have
No.
big,
I had 30 years dealing with Willits.
And Larry has a full plate already.
I've got a full plate.
Yeah, right.
Can't put it more
I
directly.
just love
than that.
driving over here all the time, so it's no big deal. All right.
Thank you.
Let's see, do we need a motion? I think the chair can appoint, so in this case, the vice chair has the powers of the chair today and can appoint, so.
Okay, I'll appoint Steve Scalamini and Georgina Krosky and myself.
All right, thank you very much. Okay.
Okay. Now we move on to the consent calendar, and there's only one item on there, the approval of the February 5th meeting, 2018. Can I get a motion?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second.
That's all it takes.
And it's just the minutes, so we don't need a roll call.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee and reconvene as the Ratifying Action of Policy Advisory Committee. And we're going to reports.
And we do want a motion for that. It's just a formality
Okay. Can I
to
get a
ratify the actions.
Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion as well to ratify the actions.
I'll second.
There
Thank
you go.
you. Voice vote is fine. Any opposed?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we're reports.
Okay.
First one up is MTA.
They're not here, so Loretta, do you have any report? She's not. Do you have anything to say? I don't have anything to report. Okay. No report.
Okay, next
Well,
is.
I don't know, I didn't discuss this earlier, but they are behind on some things, and so we're working with them to get current on things like the fiscal audit that's due and state controller's report, things like that. So I had a call from them this morning, and they have a brand new chief financial officer just started today. And so they're working on it very hard. And we expect a claim from them as well for the coming fiscal year that was due today. So I'll keep you informed.
Okay, next up is the North Coast Railway Authority. I don't think there's anybody here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
I gotta
Rev-
remember what I did. Hey, there were a couple items on the last NCRA meeting that I went to, and one of the items is they are more or less reconsidering their role, and as a result of meeting with the California Transportation Commission, and they have always, advocated that the fact that, eventually they're going to be continuing with freight service, all the way through the Eel River Canyon up to Eureka, where the line actually ends. And so there's lots of discussion at the meeting, because there was kind of two different placeholder bills that had been proposed that would in effect terminate the North Coast Railroad Authority and turn the responsibility for, I think, a 2-year period over to Caltrans as far as what to do with it. The remaining part that was, let me start over. For part of the line, but the most productive part of the line that belongs to SMART at this point would be turned over to the SMART to run that portion, and the part that was outside of the SMART service area would be turned over to Caltrans for, I think, for 2 years to study what to do with it, whether to turn the assets over to, as far as creating this great, what's the name of the trail they came up with? The Great Eel River Trail is a Redwood Trail. So there's, in this language of the proposed legislation, they're saying, well, maybe the north end should be going to this trail that could be developed along the rail line, much as here in Ukiah we have a railway trail, but it's urban characteristics used to be for local circulation. But the bill says, well, the part that is not of any use to the Sonoma Marin Transit Authority would go to Caltrans first to study and perhaps create another entity that would administer a trail to the north. So that's pretty much the way it stood, and what I found was that the board members actually took no position on either version of those bills. They're slightly different, and seemed somewhat content that the fact that they were could be put out of business as a state agency, and that part of this bill would pay off all of the debt of NCRA, so that the part that would revert to SMART would be unencumbered. So they could get out of the whole deal with somehow the state picking up and paying all their debts. And so the amazing part was, after watching this for I don't know how many years, 25 years or whatever it is it's been in existence, that it seemed to reach the point where they feel there's no other way out, they took exactly no position on that legislation. I think they've come to reality that there's not going to be any bailout other than paying off the existing assets. I forgot this was on the agenda. That's why I'm kind of stuttering my way through that. That's the best I can explain it, unless Loretta, who normally goes to these meetings, can correct me on any of this or has anything else to add. The other reason I was there was something on the agenda that supported a potential railway trail in Willits, and they were very supportive of that. I know the city of Willits has applied for funding under the urban greening program that the city of Ukiah was just recently successful in, and the city, I talked to their grant writer that they have, and he told me that they have also applied, and they got the initial go-ahead to submit a full application, because there's a two-part application to this. You give them their concept, and then they review it, and if they like it, they say, yeah, give us a full application. So Willits is also in that phase of submitting their full application, so they might get their full railway trail application funded, and that goes all the way from Commercial Street all the way down to East Hill Road. So I can't remember what the total cost was, but it was about $3 million, if I remember right. So
About 5.
Pardon me?
5 for ours.
5? Well, yeah. When it was originally proposed, I think it was about 3. That's probably what's happened, because that was several years ago. So, and they said they were going to write a supportive letter to that will be going in the application packet, that they are supportive of using that right away for such a railway trail. Did I miss anything? No. Eventually I get it all, I think.
Steve?
A couple questions. Does SMART stop at Cloverdale?
That's as far as they're going. I just want to let you know that, when there is a quarter-cent, I think, quarter-cent sales tax that was passed many years ago in both Sonoma and Marin counties to start up this SMART line. And so that's as far as they envision going to, is Cloverdale.
Okay.
And of course, it was always anticipated that the rest of the line would be open to freight traffic as well.
Okay. And my only other question might be a little obscure for the moment, and I don't want to put a spotlight on Georgianne, but does anybody know how the Kunzler Terrace mine expects to get their gravel to market without a railroad? And
well,
that was approved 10 years ago, so way before your time. But it's
Right.
They've
it's
had
a couple
since-
miles north of Masonite, another mile or something.
They've had
whatever.
since 1997 to figure it out, because that's the last time a train went by here.
Yeah. Well.
I actually know something about it.
Here he comes.
Please.
Ask the question, someone will be able to answer.
One thing is Supervisor Crosby's District 3, that's District 1, so you could talk to Kerry Brown. As far as I know, and the Planning and Building Director could confirm it, but I don't think the Kunzler Terrace mine, I think they paused the application. So I didn't know that the railroad was going to be the start or stop. Their proposal was to truck it out on Kunzler Ranch Road to North State Street.
Yeah.
But I think it all parked. I mean, it just
Okay.
parked.
All right. Thank you.
Well, it has been 21 years since the railroad has run anything by here. So I would assume they're planning on trucking.
I guess so. I mean, it was put in for that kind of reason, you know, that sort of industrial development, but
Yeah, I
there's
mean,
not enough to support it, then so be it.
well, I think that's the problem. There's so few types of industrial activity that needs that kind of bulk product to make the pencil out for rail. I've exhausted my knowledge, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. We're going to get back to you, though. MCOG staff summary of meetings. Change gears.
You have my usual list of things that we put together to show you we actually do things, if not attend meetings all the time. I don't have anything in particular to point out, I don't think. A lot of routine things. Any questions?
Okay, let's go to D. You're still there. Administration staff.
The executive committee that's Janet's. She has a report in your packet, executive committee. So she'll respond to any questions you may have.
Well, we were just going to report out about the initial draft budget, which is mainly what the executive committee looked at on February 28th, as well as the Covelo Trail issue I already mentioned. And I was trying to see if there's anything else. Those are the major items. So, just in summary, you have this one-page chart that I always start with, and that's got the basic numbers on it. I'll go over those. Next month, we'll have more of a workshop, a presentation. And in June, you'll be adopting one of these, you know, full documents with all the details in it. But for now, we're just looking for the raw numbers. And it starts with a county auditor's estimate as required by law of the quarter cent sales tax revenues, which is our local transportation fund source. And that is for the coming year of a fiscal year 18-19, $3,751,508. And that is up significantly. I would like to explain that a little bit. That's literally up 7.4% over the estimate from a year ago. But when the auditor gives us this estimate, he also kind of revises, takes a look at the current year's estimate, where we are with actuals, looks back at the previous 7 months, because it's due February 1st. You've got 7 months of fiscal year to look at from July to January. So he looks at those, the revenues that have been coming in compared to the same 7 months the previous year. So that's only an increase of 3.38%, less than 3.5%. And that's just a little over the inflation rate from a year ago, the rate that we use. Looking back, we get that from the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and that's 2.94, so just under 3%. So it looks like the growth has been about 3.5%, but that does add a significant amount to our budget, about $250,000, $259,000, almost $260,000 to our starting budget number. So just that's an overview of that. He does predict an excess of about 3%, $110,000 for the current year we're in right now. Of course, we always wait to see what the actuals are. We're not planning on allocating any of that. We wait till we have a fiscal audit. If we do have that excess revenue, it'll go into the following year's budget in 2019-20. We did have enough money to fully fund the local transportation fund reserve at the 5% according to our adopted policy. That's $188,000. And that really is for transit purposes. That's if MTA has some unusual spike in costs like fuel or healthcare, insurance, things like that. Or if our budget estimate does not materialize and we fall short on our allocation, that's where we go first to find some money. We have a very small amount, 29,000 left from the prior year unallocated revenues that started out at, I used to have this number in my head, $500 and almost $600,000. Originally, that was part of this. Oh, it's right here in my staff report, $596,200. That was the 2 months of revenue that sort of fell between the cracks when we had to shift to the county's accrual method of accounting for the revenues. So we had 2 months hanging out there that didn't get budgeted anywhere. And so that's been gradually being allocated. Almost all of it's gone to transit purposes. And we have $29,000 left. A little bit went to our bike and ped fund, about $12,000. So that's the revenue side, and the executive committee recommended as follows. Allocate the full 5% to the local transportation fund reserve at $188,000, and that will release for allocation almost $60,000. $59,998 that can go into the budget. That's a result of the excess revenues we had, a result of all the revenues. We have that $29,000 still set aside until we're ready to address it or have a need for that prior year unallocated revenue. Administration, $442,444. And, you know, there's a discussion in my packet about how we arrive at that. 2% to the optional bicycle and pedestrian program, which this council favors doing every year, $66,000 there. Planning asked for $147,816 for all of the requests that went through the technical advisory committee, all the proposals, and what planning staff has drafted in the work program. That was the need for the local funds, $147,000, almost $148,000. And that leaves a balance available for MTA to claim. For public transit, we only have the one claimant, and that leaves $3,155,065 for transit. Now, that's that first column in the sheet here. That's just the local transportation fund. All of these other funding sources, the next two are, well, the next one is state transit assistance. That only has the one claimant. That's actually going up as a result of Senate Bill 1. So that's going to be a significant increase for transit right there. We only have MTA to claim that, and they'll put that in their claim. The Capital Reserve Fund does come from the local transportation fund, so that's an extension of that. We have $300,000 sitting there for MTA to claim. The others are primarily in the overall work program for planning. We have several sources for all of that. And that will come to you with a lot more detail next month when Loretta talks about it in our budget presentation. And finally, the last thing on the chart here is the Regional Surface Transportation Program that Phil brought up earlier. We're talking about the partnership fund and the formula monies. These start out as federal monies. They get washed for state monies. We get a regional apportionment to our county. MCOG administers that. So what are we, it's saying we're going to get, there's an estimate of $737,000 for the coming year. That's likely to change. We tend to get less than they start out saying we're going to get. We'll see. That's about it, really. Any questions on that? Oh, we don't require any action. We're just letting you know where we are. It's kind of complicated. We have a lot of sources. Most of the decisions are around the local funds. So you'll be hearing a lot more about it next month. So if you think of anything you want to know, we'll talk a lot about it. So that's all I have. Okay.
Next item is the California Transportation Commission Town Hall. You have a staff report. Once a year, sometimes twice a year, the California Transportation Commission has a town hall and gives the commission an opportunity to go to places they usually don't go to, because we seem to always be on a Sacramento, Bay Area, Riverside, San Diego, LA circuit. And that kind of leaves out at least a third of California to the north of Sacramento. And so they try to get off to some rural areas at least once a year. Not all the commissioners attend, but usually we have several of them that are very dedicated, particularly some that are very supportive of rural areas. So this time it's scheduled for next Wednesday in Santa Rosa. It's listed as Lake Mendocino and Sonoma, but for practical purposes of transportation, Santa Rosa is the closest we're going to get. The air service is critical to getting good attendance from the commissioners, so we need to be somewhere close to have some kind of airport. This is our opportunity. We do have a 45-minute segment dedicated to Mendocino on the afternoon of the 11th. There's some field trips that's scheduled on the 12th, but the opportunity for input from our people is on the 11th. What I would like to see is if there's a board member that would like to go and has something to say to the commissioners about what I call rural realities, because they hear a lot from the large urban areas that have a lot of staffing, that attend every meeting there is and always has a present that's always plugging what their projects are. But what they don't need to see is me. They need to see elected officials and local staff, people that aren't there that they don't see all the time, and hopefully those people who show up from here say something close to what I've been telling for decades, and may have a different perspective on what it's like to live in a rural area where we're always competing with major population areas for access to programs or certainly funding. So
I think Supervisor Jurdy would be a wonderful choice.
Pardon me?
I think Supervisor Jurdy would be a great choice.
Yep.
You're being recorded.
Yeah. What I did already, Point Arena seems to come up a lot at this meeting, but what I did already in thinking about one person that would be good there is I drafted Richard Shoemaker, who was, maybe you don't know, on the Ukiah City Council. That's how he got involved. He's on my board here for many years. Then he was on the Board of Supervisors, and now he's a city manager. I mean, what other person can represent all those aspects? So, and he did agree to do that. I would be happy if another elected person on this board wants to attend. They just need to understand. We don't have a lot of time. We have 45 minutes. I don't want to take more than, I'll be there to introduce things, but I don't want to take more than 5 minutes. I want to leave it up to people that they never seen or heard of before. It would be a lot more effective. So I want to put that opportunity out to you. Please consider it and contact me. Our starting time is, I think, at 1:15 p.m. next Wednesday, the 11th. That's all I have to do is ask you to help, and if is there any further discussion? If not, please get a hold of me.
Next. You're still going.
Next,
Yeah.
A report from Janet.
Well, I went to a very interesting forum, the California Transportation Forum. They do this every year over in Sacramento. And this year was kind of exciting, really. We had a keynote speaker, Tony Seba. I bought his book after that because it was so fascinating. That is about clean disruption of energy and transportation. In fact, a lot of our meetings that we're going to statewide are talking about the disruptions that are coming up and happening to they're going to be impacting our transportation plans and all kinds of things. So it's just kind of the convergence of technology that's happening, and the energy sector. Solar is growing extremely rapidly, and electric cars are emerging as the most economical alternative that will be available, and significantly cheaper to fuel and maintain than anything else out there. So he's saying it's only going to be a few more years before we see those really take hold.
I'm sorry, how many was that?
Well, let's see, what did he say? He said he's saying a little radical statement that the fossil fuels and electric utilities, conventional cars are going to be obsolete by 2030. So just around the corner. And they're already starting to happen. So that was a really interesting presentation, and he alluded a lot to how fast cell phones and smartphones have taken hold, and a lot of the new technologies and disruptive business models, like the things that the internet has brought to us and social media have brought, and how fast these things are coming along. So that was the keynote, and then usually we have panels talking about a lot of current issues, and you've got my staff report, and you can take a look at that. Any questions on that? It's kind of the latest developments they talk about with us. And the big things, of course, SB1, the repeal effort, and the need to defend that. So there's that, and also that our CalTrans director is retiring. So, do you remember the name of the successor, Rex? That's
woman.
Yeah, Loretta seems to have that name. We'll be finding out.
Lori Berman. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. I knew that.
So we'll have a new CalTrans director pretty soon.
Lori Berman.
Yeah. Right, so that's pretty much that. And, I do have one miscellaneous. I'm sorry to add this at the last minute, but it's kind of the right time to just remind you that we're working on a fuel cell electric vehicle readiness plan with several other counties. It's called the North Coast and Upstate Fuel Cell EV Readiness Plan, and one of the products already out is a draft Regional Hydrogen Infrastructure Plan. And I'm bringing this up now because we're one of several counties that are involved in this, and we have a small role. It's being run by the Redwood Coast Energy Authority up in Eureka, and we're part of a grant, and so we have a few duties and commitments in this, and we'll be doing a little bit of outreach over the coming months, and doing a little bit of education and just kind of initiating the public into what these things are. And part of the project is some macro siting of fueling stations for these hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And the phase 1 would be in the Reading Red Bluff area, and the phase 2 down the line would be the Eureka. Oh wait, I don't know if I have my facts right. It's I had it flagged. It's Reading and Red Bluff and the Eureka area, and then the phase 2 follow-on would be Ukiah would be in the phase 2 area. So just looking at the data that's coming out of this. So, yeah, here we go. Phase 1, Reading, Red Bluff, and Eureka, Arcata, Fortuna. And then the second phase would be, it turned out that Crescent City met 3 of the micro-siting criteria and Ukiah met 2, so those 2 cities are in a second phase that they're gonna put in the plan. So we've been asked to put out a request for information. I'll be sending an email around as some more of an email list and just putting out the word to you all that they would like to find out if there's anybody that wants to be involved in this planning effort, any property owners that have any interest at all in maybe having a fueling station site, anything like that, we want to know about it. So I'd like put me in touch with anybody that you know that's interested in this subject. So this will all be going on over the next few months. I think it'll wrap up in August maybe. So I had to let you know that.
Question.
Yeah.
Does anyone know if the new truck stop is planning ahead for that kind of infrastructure, just since they're being built right now?
It's a statewide effort, and it's a state grant from the California Energy Commission, and it's one of the zero-emission vehicle technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Usually you hear about electric cars. Well, there are also these hydrogen cars, and, you know, it seems like it's always 20 years down the road, but, you know, it's actually, there is some technology out there that's getting closer.
You know, somebody's under construction right now. I have no idea if they're including something to accommodate the hydrogen infrastructure.
It's gas and diesel.
That's it.
Yeah.
But they can add it later. Hydrogen is like propane. So it's a gas. It's what was in the Hindenburg.
Yeah, I understand. But I don't know who, you know, like she says, well, property owners might be interested. Well, there's somebody that might be interested.
They don't want to overlook anybody that would like to be in on this. It's just a readiness plan, and they're doing some, you know, big overview siting, and they're looking at fleets. And we're also meant to identify some fleets that might be interested in looking at this. So those are the main areas we're concentrating on. So if you hear of anyone, put them in touch with me. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, it's all yours.
Planning staff is next.
Okay. So I will try to make it brief. This is just a follow-up on the Regional Transportation Improvement Program that you adopted in December. The project and project components that were approved in that were forwarded on to the California Transportation Commission for adoption in the State Transportation Improvement Program. That happened in March, and the everything that was requested was approved as part of the STIP. It's all listed in the staff report. One change from what we had requested to what was ultimately approved is that the programming for the North State intersection project, which is the one that includes the KUKI intersection that we discussed earlier, that was delayed by 1 year. So the environmental component of that project will start in fiscal year 2021, followed the next year by the PSNE component. Everything else was approved as requested. And I do want to just highlight a couple things here because we were discussing SB1 earlier and wanting to know specific projects that are moving forward because of SB1. So 2 of these projects, the North State project and Fort Bragg's South Main Street pedestrian improvements, those were 2 projects that were actually deleted in 2016. In the 2016 STIP, they were deleted completely. That was a result of the volatility of the excise tax that Howard mentioned earlier. That particular funding source had become so unreliable over the last few years that, you know, I know it's been reported to this board. I know Howard's reported to the Board of Supervisors how it affected local funding that comes directly to the county and the cities, but also it impacted the State Transportation Improvement Program. And so in 2016, for the first time, since the passage of SB 45, which gave more regional control to the STIP program, projects had to actually be deleted because there was a negative fund estimate. So because of the passage of SB 1, which in addition to increasing the money that comes directly to local agencies, it really helped to stabilize some of those other funding sources, and so we were able to restore those two projects in the STIP. So those are two specific things that have happened because of the passage of SB 1. So everything else that is listed here in the staff report are some additional programming that we were able to move forward with. And then I also just want to touch on the future funding commitments that were part of that RTIP that was approved in December. So for existing projects, so the North State project, there was a commitment of approximately $1.6 million for the next components of that, which would be right-of-way and construction. And then the City of Ukiah has an existing project in the STIP, the roundabout right out here at Low Gap Road and North Bush, which is further down the road in the STIP, but we do have a future funding commitment of approximately $700,000 for construction of that project. And then, although we do not have a specific dollar amount committed to it, the Wallala project that's listed here, the Wallala Downtown Streetscape project, in this particular STIP, we were able to program funding for the PS&E component, which is plan specifications and estimates. So we anticipate in the next RTIP, which will be 2020, that project will be ready for the next for funding for the next component, which would be right-of-way and potentially construction. So those are some things that we will be looking forward to in the 2020 RTIP, which we will be working on next summer when we get or summer of 2019, when we will be getting the fund estimate for that. So that's all I have to say about the STIP. And I can answer any questions if there are any.
Okay. Now we're ready to move on to the MCOG. What? Go ahead. Okay.
I just want to briefly give you a report that in the current work program under Work Element 3, we have a work element community transportation planning. So I just wanted to let you know that in the next week or so, Phil and I will be in Point Arena tomorrow, and we'll be in Willits on Wednesday, and then we'll be scheduling meetings in other communities. We're going to go back to communities that have previously had downtown plans or community plans in some of the grants that we've done over the last decade or so, revisit those communities, look at the priorities in the plan, see if they're still feasible and whether or not they're still priorities. It's just to kind of, reconnect with the community and see how we can move the projects forward. So we're going to be working on that this spring. Thank you.
Starting to work on it. We'll continue on next year. The reason this is important is that we started having these planning grants through Caltrans, and we went and had them and trying to determine what the local communities want, and most of them were unincorporated areas. Well, they include obviously Covelo and Laytonville and Westport and Anderson Valley and Wallala and where? Upland, yeah, that was the last one. And then we did a mode-specific one, railway trail plan, and so we've done a bunch of them. And what happens is you go in there and hire consultants, and they have all these community meetings, and they come up with all these ideas of things, get it down to priorities, and then we go away, and then you got the picture. Here we go away, and then we work on trying to find funding sources to construct those things, and then were gone for years, and then people were thinking, well, why'd they show up here and get us all fired up about something? And 2 or 3 years later, they see nothing happening, which is like next week for us. And so we want to go back there, and going back to Point Arena, that was kind of like the instant gratification. We no sooner got the thing done, I think in April or May of that year, and we applied for funding for that Safe Routes to School grant to do much of what Point Arena wanted, and we got it by August. And it was just like, that seldom happens, but it also happened in Covelo when we just accepted that plan, and then this active transportation program came up, and we applied and got 3 straight grants out of it to hopefully build something up there in Covelo. But once in a while things just work right, but most of the time we get some things done fairly quickly, and then we're working on the harder items to do, and it takes sometimes decades to do things, and people are probably thinking, well, that was a big waste of time, but it isn't. And it's just like what happened with this last one in Hopland, when I had no idea. We went go through this planning process and found that one of the biggest problems they have in Hopland is particularly for attracting tourists, is the grade of the road through Hopland is cantered like this, and so one sidewalk on the east side is probably 4 or 5 feet higher. Well, it's lower than on the west side, and if you're looking at ADA, it doesn't even come close to having anybody in a wheelchair go across that. And it's pretty striking when you go down the other side on the east side and look up there and see that the other sidewalk on the other side of the street. Well, it was all built as a state highway, and it was built at a certain level, and that was all before ADA came about in 1991. And then you add on layer after layer of repaving over time, it keeps getting worse. So, and found out that is a big impediment to the community trying to attract more tourists to stop there, and as along with the 175 intersection. And so we get Caltrans is initiating a project initiation document to go through there and cure that problem, but it's all in a process that takes a couple years of our PID, and then we're going to do it, but then it's scheduled in year X or Y, and to the common person is, well, why don't you just fix it? Hey, why don't you?
Takes time. Takes time.
But they have no way of knowing that. But we have to go back and explain these things. Yeah, and then when I report back to Hopland next time, I'll say, yeah, Caltrans is working on it, and it's scheduled in year 32 or something.
Somewhere out there.
5 or 6, 7.
The other little
but
piece,
at least we didn't know about it before.
And the other little piece of good news is that you mentioned the ATP program. It appears to only be getting bigger. So the funding for those kinds of complete streets, non-motorized projects, is becoming gradually more and more.
So the purpose of this is go back to the communities, have a community meeting, and look at what's been completed, cross that off the list, reconfirm with everybody what else, are these still priorities? Is still what you want to work on? Because guess what, it's going to take even longer. But just tell us that you still want to do this. And in conjunction with that, we have transitioning to a new website, and we're going to have, I don't know if it's called a page or whatever, yeah. We're going to have a page devoted to each one of these planning efforts. And as we periodically go back there, it will be up there, and you can see what was completed, when it was completed, what remains as priorities, and then we'll try to keep it updated as far as when the next thing is due to happen, so that
We have a
all
start.
of them will be.
Yeah, we have a
there.
start on those pages. I built kind of a landing page for the community plans, and I've just posted the Rails with Trails plan status, so it has its own page up there. And that's Ukiah, Willits,
That's it.
and the county
possibly the
in
county,
between.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's up. Point Arena's going to go up pretty soon, and Westport, which has been kind of neglected for a long time, and Wallala will be, I think, after that, and we'll gradually get them all filled in.
So that's more than you counted for under miscellaneous, but
Okay, next. We are looking at anything from MCOG Directors. Steve.
I thought I should mention, particularly to Rex, that made some progress on ADA requirements with a few other folks up in the office there.
Good news or just
good
progress?
News. Good news and more definition of what the requirements are and what infrastructure for ADA, particularly ramps, built prior to '91 still qualify for not having to be rebuilt after 2000 and something, and you know, some information like this. I'm not going to say we're to the bottom of it, but we took a step in the right direction.
And that was our local assistance branch in Eureka. Those
yes,
folks?
and there is an ADA expert there I didn't know of. You know,
so I will pass on the kudos then.
Okay, yeah, pass that
Thank
along.
you.
Anybody else? Okay, we're to the last one. COG Delegates.
So I can certainly talk about it unless Janet has a presentation she wants to give. I saw that they did have the forum at the end of the packet. If you notice, it's a very aggressive schedule at these meetings. I have not been to one yet that has a different topic every 15 minutes. So it is a lot of information that they're throwing at you rather quickly. I would say that the two main focuses there was looking towards the future, as well as looking at SB1 and Prop 69 and how can we make sure to get our stories out on what we're doing. So looking towards the future, just some tidbits, some of the facts that they presented, I scoffed at a bit, but you know, they say by 2030 the estimate is 8 out of 10 people will not own a car. So, which seems somewhat ridiculous, but I actually just flew a couple days ago, and I was in line for like an hour at the airport with 3 other people that none of them owned a car. So, you know, I suppose it's certainly possible. So 8 out of 10 people are not supposed to own a car by 2030. And very interesting, they had the head of the Department of Planning in LA, and he said, you know, a couple years ago they actually enacted that every parking structure has to be able to be converted into a residence now if you're going to build a new parking structure, because they think that parking lots are going to be going away as well. So, you know, as we look forward, I think it's hard to keep up some of our planning because we do plan so far out with how quick technology is changing. So I think a lot of your points, you know, rising sea levels are very important, and our changing technology, very important. So, you know, they also think, you know, autonomous vehicles are here a lot quicker than I think a lot of us expect. Obviously, some of that is going to filter slower here in the country than it will in the cities. But, you know, I'm trying to think of other important things they talked about. I mean, there was a lot focused on SB1 and Prop 69 just because of the impact that it's going to have, and how can we get out and really let people in the community know what good it is doing. You know, eventually I think rather than have a gas tax, you know, there will be a mileage tax instead. And there were several different talks on cybersecurity, and that being a big concern with autonomous vehicles. So I don't know, any questions over things you see here? I can certainly tell you what was discussed, but those were, I think, probably the two big topics for the future and you know, where we are headed with technology and how do we protect some of that, especially with this, if we move to a mileage tax, how to protect drivers' information. Yes.
Was there any discussion about transition from to renewable sources such as solar as it relates to PG&E and their survival?
You know what? There really was no discussion as far as the energy side of it. That I don't remember anything. I don't know if you do, but
much more in that other forum I attended. You know,
yeah, it sounded like it.
Utilities are going to be struggling as you know, decentralized energy gets more established. You know, distributed energy they call that. So, yeah.
Bill,
I didn't attend this. Most of this stuff I get during the year, but at the California Transportation Commission meeting, when was that, a week and a half ago in Orange, they had a report called Disruptive Trends in Transportation.
There's that word again.
Disruptive, and it was about that very thing that you know, a lot of the younger people, you know, I've been hearing about it for years. You know, it used to be a rite of passage to get your driver's license at 16. By God, on your 16th birthday, you better have it. And there's people that I've heard in the last few years, graduating from high school without a driver's license, and now in college without them, and they don't feel the need to. I don't know why spend $40,000 on a car. I don't know why they, but there's just no desire to do it, and they feel there's other ways of doing it, and so one of the things with Uber and Lyft and the other ones is that they're looking at what this might be doing to the entire transportation system. In some places, it might be clogging some of the roadways up with these entrepreneurs drifting around waiting to pick people up. But one of the things that I hadn't thought about, what they pointed out, was what it's going to do with the public transit system that we've all heavily invested in for many, many years, and they're already worried about, you know, what's that going to mean with its big impact on public transit, something that I hadn't even thought about. So if this really, you know, there's always people out there predicting all these immediate changes. I remember in the 50s they were talking about driverless cars, and you know, I was alive, but I remember them talking about that in Disney animation things about it, and here we are, just a short 60 years later. And it's actually happening. Yeah. I'm not saying I'm a fan of it, but it's happening, and all these other cultural changes will impact what we're going to be doing in the future. And as you all know, it takes 10 years of planning and another 10 or 20 years to get the money to build something. So it takes 20 or 30 years, and then are we building the right things now? I can tell you pretty assuredly what we're doing in the rural areas, we're going to still need personal vehicle transportation for quite some time. But we're not going to, you know, we're not planning a BART system here or anything else that you really have to think about in the future. But we're going to be highly dependent on personal vehicles for quite some time.
Especially in the rural areas, there's going to be a critical mass in a lot of areas, the urban areas where this really is happening. And it is, the private sector's moving faster than we can possibly work, you know, and the stuff's coming at us and we're in reactive mode a lot of the time. But it really is coming, and some of the solutions are, you know, cleaner and greener. It's going to be better in a lot of ways. And you know, I drove my electric Chevy Bolt battery electric car down to Monterey, and you know, hit up all the charging stations on the way, and you know, we were running into people. There were other, in fact, other Chevy Bolts because they go 250 miles now. And there were people that were doing the ride share. They were hanging out, parked at these charging stations between their rides they were giving, you know, and so. Yeah, so they are predicting that the autonomous vehicles will definitely be electric, and
So you got to attract hitchhikers? Is that what you're saying? That's really what. Oh, well, I think that will happen now.
well, maybe they're hailed
don't
through
think
an
you
app
hitchhike
on
'cause
your
most people
phone.
make
You don't
you
stick your
pay
thumb
to
out
hitchhike now.
anymore.
Won't be called hitchhiking.
It's not called hitchhiking.
It's called Uber. It's not hitchhiking.
That's right. So, this stuff is actually coming. It's happening.
And there was a good discussion on emergency planning as well, about mass evacuations and how our roads are really not set up for mass evacuations like they are in the South. I mean, the way that our exits loop around, if you make everything one direction, you can't get off on the exit that's going the other direction. So there was some interesting just emergency planning, and they did have some individuals from Santa Barbara and Ventura come to talk about how they got through the mudslides and how they're still dealing with all of the issues there. That's all I have.
Good meeting.
Anybody else? I think we're done. We'll adjourn at 4:43.
Well, sorry for the late start.